Signs that a deal could be reached soon to end the partial government shutdown and reinstate funding for the TSA. Boy, do we need that. After a meeting at the White House last night, Senate Republicans now believe President Trump is willing to accept a potential deal to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, even if it does not fully fund ICE. That is according to Republican senators briefed on the meeting. Under the proposal presented to Trump, Senate Republicans would pass additional money for ICE under the budget reconciliation process. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it may be close to the deal Trump rejected that would have reopened DHS and paid TSA agents by the end of the week. Here's what Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana revealed yesterday on Fox News.
Senator Cruz and I came up with a plan. We said, look, it's a two-step process. The Democrats have offered to open up everything but ICE. Ted and I said, okay, let's accept their offer. And then at the same time, we would offer a bill for reconciliation where we don't need any Democratic votes to do whatever we wanted to do with ICE. And that way we're out of the shutdown and DHS is back open. We submitted that. Senator Thune submitted that to President Trump, as is his right. He said no. No deals with the Democrats. So we're back to square one.
Okay. Let's bring in Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. He's a member of the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees and author of the new book, Stand, which is out today. And we'll get to the book in just a moment. Congratulations on that. Also with us, MS Now senior Capitol Hill reporter and host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale.
So, Senator, we got some reports of action on the floor last night, possibility of a deal from Republican senators that came back from the White House, some talks that they're going to try to draft a deal that Democrats and Republicans can all agree to. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the deal is no different than what we've been demanding. I know that they're calling this the Texas two-step. I prefer the Jersey, get the hell out of my way. They put ICE in our airports to cause more chaos and, frankly, cruelty to the passengers who are waiting in long lines. That's not where ICE belongs. We should have paid TSA weeks ago. Democrats have for 7 times tried to get them just to pay TSA, pay FEMA, pay the Coast Guard. We are fighting over ICE because they've been doing horrific, hellish things in our communities, slamming Americans to the pavement, barging and breaking down doors to American homes, pulling veterans out in their underwear and putting them in zip ties. So if they want to fund that through reconciliation, which is a 50th vote threshold, that's their right and their prerogative, but I'm not going to vote for another dollar for that agency.
Hey, Senator, could you explain to people that may not have been following this closely how Democrats, you say 7 times, have gone to the floor and tried to get our TSA agents in airports paid, and Republicans have killed that every single time. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's very simple. There's been a massive fight over ICE, which is in the Department of Homeland Security. There has been, understandably, all across this country, worries about their tactics, the violence that's resulted, the chaos in communities. And so Democrats have said we're not giving more money to an agency that's out of control without substantive reforms. Well, what this president and the Republicans' position is, okay, if you don't want to fund ICE, you're not going to fund any other agency. We're going to shut down the whole Department of Homeland Security. And that's absurd. They're holding TSA hostage, causing pain there in hopes that it'll force many of our moderates to break and say, okay, don't hurt us anymore. We'll give you what you want with ICE. That's just not happening. That's DOA. And we hope that this deal that they're about to do, which is called a deal, really it's a capitulation to really what we need right now, which is to release our airports, release funding to TSA and to other key agencies like FEMA and like the Coast Guard, and let's start ending the cruelty and, frankly, the chaos that you've been causing with these ICE agents, which are funded already to the tune of an amount greater than most countries' militaries.
Senator Booker, this can all be confusing, understandably, to a lot of people trying to keep up with it. But the Save America Act, which Donald Trump was promoting again yesterday, imploring Leader Thune to blow up the filibuster if he had to, stay through Easter, do whatever you have to do. He even said, do it for Jesus. And then if that goes through, then maybe he'll let the TSA agents who are working so hard and around the clock get paid. Can you explain what's in the Save America bill and why the idea of tying what's in that bill to paying government workers who are not being paid right now, why that is so absurd to you?
Yeah, Donald Trump's usual bluster. He has again made this grand statement: I'm not going to sign any bill that comes to me unless the SAVE Act comes to me first. The SAVE Act is a massive voter suppression bill that would make it very difficult for millions of Americans, especially women who have changed their name on their birth certificate no longer matches the name on their real ID or driver's license. It would cause chaos to voting and really shrink the voting rolls 5 or 10%, given the effect it would have. I was talking to a retired, very moderate senator yesterday. We were both laughing. Democrats should just be quiet and let somebody like Lisa Murkowski, who did a big chart, big state of Alaska she put up in her speech and just showed what the SAVE Act would do to voters, making them have to hop on planes, fly across her state, which is pretty vast, just to be able to present identification at the right place. We do not need voter suppression in the United States of America, and we do not need another scheme from Donald Trump, who's still litigating his 2020 loss, another scheme by him that would make it more difficult for American citizens to vote at the polls.
Senator, on that theme, part of that theme that you just referenced, you spoke yesterday to a relatively moderate Republican senator. I'm wondering, in the course of what happened over the weekend when Bob Mueller died, the President of the United States issued a statement on Truth Social, basically, and he did say, "Good, I'm glad he's dead," about a man who served this country honorably for over 50 years, from Vietnam through his changing the format of the FBI and changing the agency to make it better. I'm wondering if any Republican senators you speak with, did they say anything to you? Were they ashamed of it? Were they shocked by it? Or did they say nothing about it?
I think this is a tough moment we're in our democracy. Not only is meanness and sort of a vile way we treat each other being elevated from the highest offices in our land. We've gone from with malice towards none and charity towards all to this kind of filth coming out of the president. But that doesn't bother me. Martin Luther King said, what worries me today, what we have to repent for, is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so for the last year and a few months, there are really good people in the Senate on both sides of the aisle. And I have these private conversations with my colleagues about what's wrong. But they're afraid or unwilling to say these things publicly. And that is the crisis that we're in. It is a crisis of conviction, a crisis where people aren't standing up and calling balls and strikes what they know they are. And I think this is why, not Donald Trump. We've had demagogues and blowhards rise to extraordinary power, from McCarthyism to Father Conklin's anti-Semitic screeds. We've had that in our country before. But what we've always had to match that is courageous people, often of the same party, who are willing to stand up and call it out. This is what we need right now, is more Americans willing to stand for who we are and what actually binds us together across political aisles. The silence right now is killing our democracy.
I wonder, when you think about the silence, you've been someone who has pushed several war powers resolutions in the Senate, along with Senator Kaine and others. There are more, I think, expected this week, right? But in your conversations with Republicans, is it an instance where they're worried about speaking out against the administration during this ongoing war? Or is it that they actually support the substantive policy that the administration is trying to engage with here on possible regime change, on continued pressure on the Iranian regime to some undefined end?
So I'm not wrapping myself around the axle of trying to figure out why we're in this moment where our founders are rolling over in their graves. This is, look, presidents on both sides have been taking more and more power from the Article I branch of government. But to this extent, this is the largest military engagement we have had in America since the war in Afghanistan. The whole world is feeling the ramifications of this, as a global economy is in shock right now. We are seeing troops being injured, over 200 troops, 13 have paid the ultimate price for their country. And we have not held one open hearing about this. Our system depends on checks and balances, depends on oversight, depends really on accountability from each branch to the other. And what have my Republican colleagues done? They've surrendered that responsibility. They swore an oath to a Constitution. And now in the biggest military conflict that has implications that could roil the country in an economic crisis, with prices going up on Americans, and they are doing nothing when it comes to what their job is supposed to be: accountability, checks and balances, oversight. And so, yes, me and a small group of my colleagues have said enough is enough. We're all filing world powers resolutions. We're going to force a debate on the Senate floor. This is not political theater. It is trying to shock the Senate back into doing its actual job.
So, Senator, you were talking about the difficult times in this country that we're in right now, with the wrong values seeming to prevail. Your book offers a path forward. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I'm good going around this country and feeling anger and hurt and worry about the state of our nation. And people often ask me, what can I do? And my response over and over again is that we are the heroes we've been looking for. And so I've written a book that is both inspiration and instruction from our history and heroes of our history and heroes of today from across the political spectrum, who show in the worst of times this demands the best of each and every one of us, and that we have the power to change our nation. Virtue, people think often is something some niceties, but actually, if you look at our history, the best virtues of Americans, not a party, but Americans, is a strategy. It's our strength, and it's how we win in times like this.
Senator, you list some of those virtues, including truth, humility, and grace, which, as you said a moment ago, are in short supply, at least in our political media culture. I would argue they're still very much there in the real world where we all live and most of our viewers live. But how do we, again, elevate those virtues back into the public sphere, to the top of our political culture? Because it is, as the father of a couple of kids who've grown up only knowing this political culture, they internalize things and they say, oh, maybe the way ahead is meanness and cruelty and all the things that you just laid out. So how do we change that dynamic?
Well, I think the first thing is, do not expect change in the world unless you're willing to embody it yourself. And I will tell you right now, the book is full of ordinary Americans who did extraordinary things to send that energy into our country, often people that didn't have high position, that showed this nation the way to go. But let me take a guy in high position who, when I first came to the Senate, his staff said I only had 10 minutes with him, but he pulled me into his office. We were there for over an hour, a guy named John McCain. John talked to me about virtue, and especially one that's in the book about patriotism, that it's not about parties or left and right. It's about a humble devotion to this country. And he counseled me. He said, do not come here and be another politician. Now more than ever, this nation needs statespeople. And John told me about his own imperfections, his own stumbles along the way. But one of the things that I see going viral more and more in our country is him in a Republican town hall when somebody was going off in a kind of filth-laden way against Barack Obama. And in the middle of a heated presidential election with so much on the line, he said, no, Barack Obama is a good man who loves his family and is a fellow American. I disagree with him on policy, but he is a good person. Moments like that actually send shockwaves and wake us up to the truth of who we are. And this is the kind of leadership we need. I had a Republican pollster, Frank Luntz of all people, who told me that the drum I was beating about a decade ago about that we need to find that common ground and common cause, and remember that the real call of every generation is to put more indivisible into this one nation under God. And what he's saying to me in polling now is Americans are tired of the vitriol, of the hate, of the reflexive tribalism, and are looking more and more for us to get back together. Because when I look up and look around, whether it's China's robotic manufacturing or the challenges we have in Europe, we have real things coming towards us that we cannot meet as a nation unless we start to find ways to work together and stand for the best principles that have gotten us this far along the way.
Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, thank you so much. His new book, Stand, is out now. Thanks for coming on this morning. Good to have